We're going to be taking a look at impact farming, which uses peer-to-peer networking, allowing investors to link directly to farmers. Now, for a better sense of how this investment class works, I'm joined in studio by Dr Sifiso Ntombela. He's the chief economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council. Bob Ntombela, good evening to you. How are you?
Evening, I'm all right. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Doc. Let's maybe start off here. You know, I was asking you just off air how much marketing the council still does, and maybe that was a reflection of how limited my knowledge is of NAMC. But speak to us briefly about some of the work that the council does, and more importantly, I guess, the knowledge functions as well.
Thanks for that. I think I should just take a little bit back around that period in 1996, 1997, when we deregulated the agricultural sector.
Yes.
So what happens prior to that, those that are familiar with that knowledge will know that there used to be a control board system. So the function of the control board was basically to regulate the market, to regulate the prices, and also to control imports as well as the amount of production that we could produce in the country. And we had a single channel, so the control board will buy everything and then they will sell either in the domestic or the international market. So to a certain extent, when they deregulated, they said the system was not efficient and didn't allow anyone to participate freely in the open market systems. So we deregulated, and the NAMC was established under the Marketing of Agricultural Products Act of 1996. Now, the functions of the NAMC itself, first of thing, its function was to ensure that you demolish those control boards. Okay. And actually they did that within a year. All the maize board and all the likes.
So we're very efficient in dismantling.
At that time, we were very efficient in dismantling that. So an added function, so remember those boards used to have assets. Yes. So one of the things they not said to say, look, those assets somehow they belong to government, but then you have to ring fence it to what we know today as agricultural trust. So we still have the agricultural trusts that are linked into commodity sections. So some of the today's function of the NAMC is to look after those trusts and ensure that you raise the capital and the asset value of those trusts. And then we use some of the interest from those assets to actually fund things like to do with transformation activities, things to do with research and information collection.
So those assets would be things like grain stores and the like, or mills? What would
mills, the whole facilities in the BKB areas around the Port Elizabeth areas, and some of it are the grain building, as you know, in the Pretoria, where the grain commodity groups are sitting in there. But I think another important thing that has come up with the Marketing Council is basically because you remember that when we signed in the WTO, we basically decided to phase out the subsidies into the sector. Now, they must find a way of basically at least sustaining the sector itself. So what we came up with is what we call the statutory measures. So that is a levy that is collected by industries. So NMC basically look after the administration purposes of that, so that when those commodities collect those levies, they don't actually start paying each other inflated salaries, but they use it for the dedicated function. So we have guidelines of how you collect the levies and how do we actually finance certain activities within that part of it. And then another part that basically the Marketing Council does is provision of the advisory services the Act says to the minister, mainly as a shareholder, and the director affected groups. So director affected group could be the exporters, the producers, even yourself, or any other ordinary member that is affected by the policies in the sector itself. So that's where we pay a lot of space now around the creation of intelligence and information to advise how the tariff change regime are going to affect the consumers, the producers, and other things. And also issues of around the general marketing and the policy side on the supply side, like to do with the land issues, the water issues, and some of the constraints within the supply chain side of it. So there's a variety of places. Basically, we play around across the value chain of the agri sector, but mainly now it's more of an advisory service than it was in the past, where we had more control measures around the systems. So in a nutshell, that would be.
So, I mean, in light of, I guess, the context that you've given us, and I really appreciate that, because the big question that I would have is, you know, as an advisory and knowledge generating and, you know, intelligence gathering organization, when you look at some of the advances that are being made in sort of peer-to-peer financing and lending of farming activities, what are some of the trends that you're seeing there? In particular, this catch-all phrase that is called impact farming, which I think in many ways catches many different financing approaches, but let's use it for now.
Absolutely. I think one of they often say one of the biggest problems within the agricultural sector, or the agro-processing sector in general, is that you have two biggest problems. they call it an entry problem, where it's relatively expensive to enter into this, especially if you are a new player.
Yeah.
So the investment solution tend to be very strict. Considering the fact that also the operations are very risky in nature. You've got a lot of risks that are outside your control. Climate, and all those things. But the good part of it is that you have a very inelastic demand of the product, regardless how the economic, basically.
People always have to eat.
Absolutely. So what we've seen, I think it's sort of more of a general following of the general investment climate across the country and globally, where people are saying, look, let's have a more responsible investment appetite, where we say our investments should ensure that they promote environmental sustainability, they promote ethical and social upliftment of the communities around the operations where you invest in it. But of course, we need to have a good governance system like compliance with food safety, compliance with quality, and other things. So I think these new trends we see are basically trying to capture the two, because agriculture affords you that. If you want to be compliant and reduce your emissions, agriculture is probably one of the good sectors that can allow you, because we have that sink of emission because of the trees and other living organisms that you do say. So the investors are finding that appetite to say, look, perhaps to deal with the issue of very expensive investment into the sector, let's try to de-risk it and distribute the risk across different members. Pool the risk, because you might not have R1 million to get a hectare, but 5 or 6 peers around them, they can have a couple of R100 or 1,000 rand that they put together. And now you also have a changing pattern of the consumption as consumers generally increase their incomes. You tend to change your pattern of consumption. So we have what we call now those super fruits or super commodities. Like one of that is very attracting this impact farming, where you have this co-sharing of investment into the specific commodities, your blueberries, for example, because it's gaining momentum. There's a lot of it that you can put on your salad, you can put on your strawberries and all these kind of things. But we're also seeing some of the commodities that traditionally used to be very dominant in the sector, like the sugar. And generally, we're seeing a decline in that demand of it. People want to live healthy. So that creates a new demand then for commodities like the honey bush, which is more natural, and you also have some of geographical indicators that is linked into that sentimental value of certain commodities, like protecting vulnerable groups, like the soy can. So these are some of the trends that we're seeing, and we're basically seeing more of people having interest now, because people want to have interest and want to be shareholders in the sector. And the only way to do it is some of the very innovative way that is low risk, doesn't require a lot of capital, and anyone can basically start owning or can claim, say, look, I own a certain share of a certain commodity. And some of these commodities you can get 2 or 3 harvests per year. So that means it's 3 pay checks per year on some of it. So, and in general, it tends to pay very well, as I said earlier, because we have that inelastic demand of. But I must say that those, some of them, they seeing these interests, it is very important to notice that agriculture is still one of the very risky, but yet a profitable sector to invest in.
And I guess the other dimension of it, and I like the point you're making around the risk sharing, who takes what risk, and even, I guess, the frequency of the payouts. But one of the things that I think even socially, as more investors are interested in the environmental and the social impact, is the employment intensity of the agricultural sector. I think if you compare it to many other sectors, it's probably per unit of investment more labor intensive than many other sectors in the economy. And how much of that is an influence, I guess, for many investors in piquing their appetite to invest in impact farming?
It is, definitely it is, especially at the primary level. You are able to generate more head count job created per every rand you spend than any other sector you can find in the economy part of it. And another good part of it is that some of the products are very export orientated. So you are able to generate those foreign earnings that you could not get into the domestic market. But I think one of the other areas that probably will start seeing up in the near future is that you start adding value in some of these commodities that you produce.
Downstream,
so downstream industries, so that you link with the agrotourism industries, you link with the manufacturing. Because then, as much as agriculture is very good in creating jobs at the primary level, you've got to understand that those are low-skilled jobs that are not that paying very well. But now we're having a very changing labor market system in the country where you find that younger people are more unemployed, but they're much educated than we had in the past. So now you can't be able to take those younger people and put them on the farm, because you are basically doing a disservice into the investment they've done to themselves. So hence then that call to say, look, we need to now start adding value into some of these commodities so that on the downstream industries, we can be able to absorb much more skilled people and we create more jobs into that. Because that will have a much more impactful spillover effect on the overall economy of the sector going forward.
Dr. Ntombela, I guess the other dimension, and I like the point that you're making now around value addition. I mean, you spoke about some of the assets that the council has at their disposal, many of which are around sort of post-farm gate value addition. What are you seeing there? I mean, are you seeing more private operators coming into that space? It might be a mill, it might be a port terminal, it might even be a storage facility for things like livestock production and the meat industry. Are you seeing some investment happening in that space? And what are the opportunities from an impact farming perspective for investors that have, as little as, say, 300 Rand, 500 Rand, or 1,000 Rand?
There's definitely ample opportunities that we're seeing coming up there. As I said earlier, some of those commodities that are linked into the healthy lifestyle are coming up into that areas. So one of the areas, if you're looking at it specifically from the animal side, we're starting because we have a lot of these other disease related into some of these intensive farming sectors. So we're starting to have consumers having interest whether this is a free range kind of movement, because that also tells you that the animal or that animal product have been grown at a much more healthier and ethical manner
and less carbon intensive.
And less carbon intensive. So the consumers tend to feel that they are contributing somehow, not just by spending, but they're ensuring that the environment is taken care of. And the communities surrounding those areas, we're seeing consumers much more interested to say, is my rent I spend in these commodities? Some of it are being able to at least go back into the communities that have sweat to ensure that this commodity come out of it. So we're seeing, like, for example, free-range pork, free-range eggs, some of the commodities, mainly also in the fruit industries, because it's still very high profitable area that we are seeing. So around the honey, around the berries, and also some of the exotic products like the dates, which some of the commodities we not have been. We've even seen some of the new ones like the pomegranates that are coming up on it. So there's a whole range of other issues. But I must also, I think, say this, we're also seeing a very strong adoption of technology, where now you're starting to have some of this R&D that is being adopted by farmers so that they also reduce some of the resources that they are putting onto it.
On the cost side.
On the cost side, so you reduce that part of it. And I think that also increases productivity part of it. So anyone that comes in at this point in time, down the stream, basically you are likely to get more profit coming out of it because you will have this cost reduction, but the demand side and the price of the food will continue to rise. And you are bound to reap some benefit if you get into the agricultural sector.
That's what investors want to hear.
Absolutely.
Investors want to hear. Let's take this brief break, and we'll continue with Dr. Sifiso Ntombela. When we come back, he is Chief Economist at the National Agricultural Marketing Council, and we're talking to him about impact farming. Going to be taking a look at how you can navigate yourself into this space, and initial contributions coming in much lower than 1,000 Rand on some of these platforms. So indeed, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to join in on our conversation and give us some of your thoughts and share those with us on Twitter on at 405business_. Our hashtag is #BusinessUnusual. See you on the other side.